Today we are heading to the East Coast to talk charm, that unmistakable blend of salty air, painted floors, wicker furniture, and rooms that feel like they have been lived in for generations. It's a layered aesthetic, steeped in tradition, yet breezy and effortless, and it's one that today's guests know better than anyone. I'm joined today by Gary McBournie and Bill Richards, whose firm has become known for creating these richly detailed, deeply personal interiors, often with a coastal point of view. We'll talk about what sets the East Coast coastal aesthetic apart from New England to the Low Country, their recent rebrand, and the way heirloom stories and a sense of place all show up in the homes they design. So, creak open that screen door and join us as we head seaside with Gary and Bill. Welcome to Grandma's Silver, where tradition meets today. I'm Allie, your host of the Grandma Silver podcast and founder of the Grand Millennial Lifestyle. Here, we blend aesthetics with nostalgia, engaging in conversations with lifestyle brands, designers, and more to rediscover the timeless charm of the past. Join me as we journey from home to heart, illuminating the past and polishing the present with the gleam of Grandma Silver. Well, hello, gentlemen. I'm excited to be chatting with you today. I want to have you introduce yourselves and we can kind of go from there.
Hi, I'm Gary McBournie. I Boston-based designer, started my company in 1993, work all over the world, and continue to be having fun on all my projects.
Good morning. My name is Bill Richards. I'm a partner in the firm. Been working with Gary now for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And as Gary mentioned, we do projects all over the world, primarily high-end residential and the different types of projects that go along with that. It might be a plane, it might be a boat. I mean, who knows? We do travel quite a bit and do have lots of fun.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited to talk about that a bit more in a second. I do want to throw out there that if Bill's name sounded familiar to anybody, he was a guest technically last year, 2024, we talked about Nantucket by Design. That's happening again this July, so we'll talk about that later on in our conversation. But I would like to start with a little news from your world because I think it's very exciting and I want to give you an opportunity to maybe, if you wanted to talk about it, but you have recently rebranded.
Yes, we have.
Did you want to speak on that at all?
Sure. I mean, Bill's been a partner in the company now for many years. He's an integral part of all the projects. And contrary to what friends and people always think, he's not just involved in the business end of it, but also in the design part. And it just seemed to be time for him to get some kind of credit for that, to be seen as part of the company. And after 3 decades of the buck stopping with me and the name being on the door, it's kind of nice to be sharing it with somebody else and have people, have somebody else to connect with. Like his involvement with Nantucket by Design, he's become far more a part of the design world in recent years in general, and with our PR and all of that. And it just seemed like a really good time for this to all happen. Yeah, after many years of it just being me, it's nice to be us now. Even though, as I mentioned, he's been part of the business for many years. And it's funny because we had a major article about a year or so ago, and on a project in the Hudson Valley. And when it got published, the client said, "Well, where was Bill's name in this? He was a major piece of this." That's kind of where it got us thinking, or got me thinking, that it was time.
Well, the other thing that's kind of fun is we are a modern family. So not only are we partners in business, but we've been together personally for almost 25 years. We have a couple of daughters. One of them works directly with us in the business, and her last name happens to be Richard. So hopefully it paves the way for business continuity by having her name in the equation.
Well, it's very special and I'm super excited. And you've obviously already been working together for a long time and doing life together for a long time. I mean, this is very much enmeshed to begin with, but yeah. I'm excited that it's, reflected in that now.
And our other married couples wonder how we do it, but we are together most of the time, 24/7. It's our life.
There are no boundaries.
Yeah.
Where does the workday begin and end, and where's your personal life start and stop? Yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Understanding a big part of today's conversation is kind of the East Coast aesthetic, and we'll dive into that in a minute. But with it being somewhat place-based, I was going to ask where you're both from.
I was born in Boston, grew up outside the city, and yeah, I'm very much a Yankee boy, in spirit and locale. I am known as being quite a frugal Yankee. All of the uptight stuff that comes with that Bostonian upbringing, I have brought forward.
Tradition
Okay, I grew
has
up
to
in
continue
Boston.
somewhere.
Yeah.
I grew up in Boston too, but I've let some of that go.
Yeah, he's let most of it go. I don't think he ever had any of that. He's also French, by nationality. So I think a lot of that is what he has, that joy for
The
life.
joie de vivre.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, and this is kind of a loaded question because when I was thinking about it, I think we're talking more East Coast coastal, but even that will vary based on location. But how would you maybe describe this or differences in the East Coast coastal versus perhaps Southern, which can still be East Coast, but I think has its own flavor. West, California. How are there things that, from a design perspective, are glaringly different?
Very
Yeah,
much.
I mean, I think for me that the East Coast, New England East Coast in particular, is for me, it's always been about romance. It's always been about the history of the past. The old world beach house, the old world house by the shore is always in my head. I grew up summering in my grandparents' house in Maine. So that's always in me. The simplicity of it, yet the elegance, the combination of rustic and formal, especially with the Boston, and I think maybe for the South it's a similar thing, but the New England thing with brown furniture and antiques, and people bringing in there in the old days, people bringing their china and their silver for the summer to their beach houses against these rustic backgrounds. My grandparents' house was unfinished pine walls and painted floors, very simple, but yet there was an elegance within the space, and I've always liked that kind of combination. And I think that's always kind of in my head, even though these days people want a more finished kind of property. It's still, for me, that's always where my starting point is that combination between simplicity and elegance.
Okay.
I think you can see some of that, though, as you do head south, but maybe in a different way because the history is a little different, and I think the way of life is a little different. And Gary and I were talking about this last night because we do work East Coast and West Coast. And the projects, even just from a color palette, the projects are very different because the light is different. If you're in Santa Barbara, for example, if I have pick out a paint chip in Boston that I think is going to work and just assume it's going to work, and I go out to California, the light is totally different and it doesn't work. It affects the color of the water, the way the light impacts the color of the grasses and all that kind of stuff. So the color palettes are very different.
And also in Santa Barbara, as we've learned over the past, I mean, we've been doing work out there for the past 12 or 14 years. There's a thing out there in May and June that happens, and sometimes even goes into July. It's May gray, June gloom. The sky never really completely clears. It's very misty, very gray. That very much affects the way the interiors work. New England, we're used to skies clearing. We may get a rainy day or a few rainy days, but generally we have fairly clear skies. So your colors can be clearer and a little bit stronger. So it's the weather affects it. It's also the psyche within the weather, and it's not as easy a subject as it seems to be because there's a lot wrapped in and around it. And it's also people's expectation of what a summer place should be or what a beach house should be. Are they going to live in it year round by the ocean? So it's all different phases and pieces of one subject.
And then we were talking too just about how style can, so you take the light and the color palette, that sort of thing, but then you look at the range of design aesthetic from a sort of an ultra modern, something that maybe you might find in the Hamptons, to something maybe uber traditional that you might find on Nantucket or Edgartown or up on the coast of Maine or something, and how that all plays together. Ultra modern. I mean, just think just white walls, neutral carpet, maybe all together more of a neutral color palette, pale greens, pale blues, versus a more traditional one where the colors are more saturated. And then how people introduce history if they do. We always encourage, even an ultra modern house, put in a piece of brown furniture, give the house a sense of a place. Sea captain's chest or a mirror. If you're on Nantucket, a mirror, just a few little things to identify. It could even be when you talk about objects and things like Nantucket looms. I mean, Nantucket has a rich textile history. There's an exhibit at the NHA this year called Behind the Seams that's exploring Nantucket textiles and fashion. That stuff continues. There are currently people on the island weaving, and you can buy blankets at Nantucket looms, things like that to just reinforce who you are.
And Hillary Adapole, who's on Nantucket, who does
great rugs,
incredible rugs, woven sort of rag rugs and things of that sort. We try to use local resources as much as we can, like that. Speaking a lot about Nantucket here because that's where we're one of our bases is. We rely heavily on the artists and people who produce on the island for inspiration, for objects, for paintings. That becomes very much part of our life, and we try that no matter what community we're in. We try to keep it somewhat local. I think that's really important to me, is to help the artists and to help
because it supports the community, but it also establishes a connection between the homeowner and the community, which is important, especially if the homeowner hasn't lived in that locale before.
You're touching on something that I was going to kind of ask you about, which I often will talk when I talk to designers. I'm curious about is how sometimes your own upbringing and that environment shaped your design philosophy. Bill, perhaps a little looser, but both come from a more traditional aesthetic, right?
Yeah.
How does that play into how you approach something that is a little more casual for the most part, like a coastal property?
Again, I think it's sort of within me of my history of art history that I studied and painting and all that, and how I like to look back in time. And I am a major creature of reading books and reading design books. And we have an incredible library pretty much everywhere we are to look into. I get lots of inspiration from that, from things of the past. I'm a big believer in painted floors in summer houses, in coastal houses, spattered floors where they take the brush and they spatter all different colors on top of it. All those old Yankee touches, which do give it a sense of place. Patterned, painted floors. I love carpets, beautifully woven carpets, hooked rugs. I still one of those weird people that likes hooked rugs in beach houses. So it's all that history and all that stuff that I grew up with that's still kind of there within me. The whole colonial revival period from the early 20th century is big in my head all the time, because I think that's one of the best periods of time for art and design. Even if you look at McKim, Mead and White, who did palatial houses in Newport and on the Hudson River, but they also did some beautiful shingle style houses that were actually pretty simple, but with very grand, elegant details. So you have all of that to look back on and how to mix those things together.
But I think also, maybe especially from being New England, you got to loosen the necktie a little bit, especially if you're playing to a younger audience. I think you have to look at how you can take some of these things and interpret them in a either more fun or more casual way. And it could be with a painted floor. Playing with the colors. It could be a brighter checkerboard pattern on the floor. The carpet, it could be a woven rag rug, but maybe the colors are, if you got, it's for little kids, or maybe it's pink and green or purple and yellow, whatever. Just there's ways to bring those things forward in a way that it doesn't feel like you're walking into a museum.
And that has been done recently. I mean, when you think of Bunny Millen and all of her beautiful homes and the painted floors that she did and all the painted finishes, and you think of Tory Burch buying her house in Antigua and how she's kept that going, and people have been so inspired by that look. And that's what I'm talking about. And that's, that can still be incredibly fresh, as we see with those homes. I think that's being brought forward with younger people because some of them don't actually understand the history of where that came from. But now that they see that it's being done now, that becomes modern to them. I think that's a big, important part of it.
So one of the things that you touched on was that a lot of coastal properties, especially New England, are a little more rustic.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a line that as a designer you're kind of looking at where you're like, okay, we can't cross this because then we get farmy, like farmhouse, because the rustic, like that's still a lot of texture.
Well,
It's a lot more
farmhouses can be typically
casual.
dark too.
True. Yeah,
The
so
color,
lighter area.
they can be more exposed wood that's dark. They can be the color choices are different. I mean, in coastal homes, I think whether it's traditional or modern, you do see maybe more white paint, something that lightens the whole feel up. This ties to a point we wanted to make too, is we like to, and why New England might be different. We do like to tie the inside to the outside. If you have a beach house, you have the beautiful white New England sands with the dune grasses going, at the blue sky, you have pretty sunsets. It's kind of a natural to bring those things into a coastal home versus a farmhouse type house.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of when you look at the objects, the details in a farmhouse versus a beach house, they're not dissimilar. There are things that could be very much the same. It's just that, like Bill is saying, because you're looking out the windows and you're looking at a totally different environment most of the time, at least, it affects the look of the interior.
And the accessories.
It's yeah.
Right? I mean, you'd accessorize differently in more of a farmhouse kind of house.
That's true. You also mentioned Santa Barbara, California. You have experience doing projects everywhere, really.
Well,
But if we're talking about the two coasts.
Yeah, and I mentioned Antigua because we've done quite a few houses at the Mill Reef Club in Antigua, Palm Beach, and yeah.
And all of those, especially like a Palm Beach and Antigua, those are like tropical coastal, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're talking about, and I really I'm not an expert in any of these areas. I'm not a designer, but an enthusiast, if you will. I really don't know a ton about West Coast, coastal hallmarks. Are they still using, like, I feel like I look at them and I think they're more contemporary a lot of the time, the materials. So East Coast, if I think about Nantucket, I'm thinking painted wood floors. I don't really associate that with a California.
Well, California in particular is Santa Barbara, where we do a lot of work. Floors are probably more natural or scrubbed down. Textures are linens. When we're working out there, Raoul Textiles, which is one of my favorite fabric lines.
Located right in downtown Santa Barbara.
Yeah, they're located in Santa Barbara. They do incredibly beautiful screened prints in beautiful colors, but the colors tend to be a slight bit muted, which is a nice palette out there.
We're not finding like a pure white ground.
Yeah, and the white is maybe a little bit off, a little softer. A lot of natural linens, nubby linens, and antiques work nicely out there, but a little bit more casual, rustic kind of things. You don't see Chippendale chairs out there or any of that kind of thing, which you might see in Nantucket. Out there, that's kind of just doesn't work the same because the history is not there. It looks too forest. It's almost like when we have a lot of clients that sell houses in, let's say, Boston or Connecticut and move to Palm Beach. And they bring all their old rugs with them and all their stuff. It just doesn't work unless you have an incredible eye and you've learned a way to make that all mix together, and you can do that. But most of the time, it just looks dowdy and like you brought your grandmother's house to the beach.
Yeah,
and it's a subtlety, but it's very much visible.
Plus, one of the difference too is the age of the architecture. New England architecture, just by virtue of the history of the country, is going to be older in a different style than a lot of what you might see in California.
Yeah. And in California, you get a lot of metal work, metal windows, metal casement windows, things of that sort, which you don't necessarily see in New England.
And the color of the antique furniture tends to be more of a darker brown.
East Coast or
West Coast?
West Coast.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
I mean, East Coast, you see that you're more like mahogany sort of color or cherry. You see those sort of tones. In California, it's more of a real brown.
Yeah.
which looks better with those natural linen colors and the scrub floors and all that kind of thing.
If we're talking about East Coast properties, coastal properties, are there other hallmarks? I know we've touched on the painted floors, of course, antiques, which I have more questions about in a minute, but are there other elements either within design or architecture that are kind of hallmarks of the region?
Generally, I would say like lighting, chandeliers, sconces, that kind of thing, are not very heavy. It's not like being in California where there's a tradition of ironwork out there and that kind of craftsmanship. I think beach houses, probably New England, is a little bit on the lighter side, maybe brass chandeliers, antique brass
Or rope
chandeliers,
chandelier,
rope
more
chandeliers, things like
contemporary.
that. But generally, you don't see a lot of heavy ironwork in New England beach houses. And like I said, Chippendale, you can mix that into beach houses in New England. You wouldn't necessarily do it out west.
But the architecture
Um,
too, I mean, Cape Cod style homes, federal architecture,
Yep.
that kind of stuff. We're not going to see that on the West Coast.
And also a major, what I'm forgetting, and for me is a major part of beach houses and summer houses in New England would be porches. I mean, you have
Oh, yeah.
the porch is a very important part of the home. Whereas in California, you have open verandas because the bugs aren't the same out there. The summer porch is of utmost importance and is thought out as much so as the interior of the house.
By porch, just to clarify too, you think of the old traditional New England summer house with the wraparound porch, but it could also be a screen porch that's attached to the house, something which allows for a little more outdoor living. Because our season's short too in New England. Yeah, I mean, you probably have maybe 8 weeks where it's not even probably before it gets cold at night. I mean, because in Nantucket, for example, it's still going to be cold 4th of July. We put the porch heaters on, and by the end of August, you're feeling the same thing. So
Yeah.
those porch rooms, aside from the bugs, do allow you to extend the season a bit.
And if you just notice the whole trend in the past few years, people, younger designers, doing very elaborate summer porches. They're not just your furniture that you've had, your grandmother, your great grandparents had, you throw out there, and you have the summer. I mean, people are actually spending money and spending time thinking out beautiful, elegant summer porches that are very beautiful entertainment spaces. Yeah,
Not just the casual afternoon,
Yeah.
read the paper kind of thing, but
yeah.
whether it's
For
a
true
luncheon or an
entertaining.
evening event.
Yeah. We have to actually, in the summertime in our house in Nantucket, we have to force ourselves to entertain in our dining room because we all want to be out on the porch. And especially as the summer progresses, you have to think, well, we only have, 3 more weeks, 2 more weeks, 1 more week. You want to be there on the porch. That's a very important part of life.
You're touching on entertaining, which I always love to talk about. As designers, obviously, part of the conversation you have to have with your client is use of space, how they're using their property. Are you seeing people entertaining and those entertaining needs changing based on coast?
I mean, back to the porch, I think that's become a big thing. I think that people enjoy their outdoor space probably more so than they used to. I think people were far more formal, a few years ago. Even if, I look back when I had my first house in Nantucket in the 90s, people did more formal dining than they do these days.
Post-COVID, we've seen a real trend because pre-COVID, especially with families, everybody's on the go. People are just grabbing bites to eat at the island, in the kitchen, whatever. COVID forced everybody back into the house. And for as much as people might have felt confined, I think it gave them a better appreciation of what the structure of a house is all about. So this big cavernous space that's just all open doesn't really serve anybody when you're all in the home. When somebody has to be on a Zoom call, somebody just wants private space. So I think the appreciation for rooms was better. And I think people got back to entertaining a little bit, which I think don't you think that's continued more since COVID?
Yeah.
People entertaining in their homes?
And then back to my, sort of like olden days back in the 90s and Nantucket, we also spend a lot more time at the beach. As you get older or as you learn more about what the sun does to our skin, I think people are a little bit more hesitant to go to the beach and spend from dawn till dusk there and having beach parties and all that sort of thing. It still happens, but I think people are more likely to have pools these days, swimming pools, than they used to, especially in Nantucket. That brings people back to the home.
The sort of the midday luncheon at the beach thing, we have the umbrellas and the picnics. I think maybe you're right. I think the
That's kind of
sensitivity to
waned
the
a little
sun has
bit.
kind of waned a bit.
Yeah.
It's more
Yeah.
people heading out to the beach at 4 o'clock with a cooler and that kind of thing when the sun's a little bit lower.
We also entertaining wise, we entertain a lot earlier in the day. We love to, when we have house guests, we love to serve breakfast. Again, we serve breakfast on the porch.
We really don't get up that early. It's not breakfast, it's brunch.
No, it's brunch. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. But that's a major part of our summer, is entertaining in the morning, having brunch, especially.
Where does it take place?
On the porch.
Exactly.
There you go. Yeah.
That's another reason why that's become a big portion of our life. So I think entertaining, I don't know if it's changed so much over the years, but I think as every 5 years, something clicks back or clicks forward and it changes a little bit.
So if you look at just in general, the interest in tabletop right now is pretty high.
Enormous.
I mean, if you look at any of the magazines, any of the shops, tabletop's big, and it doesn't necessarily have to Gary's point. It isn't necessarily the uber expensive China and crystal kind of stuff. It's a lot of just pretty stuff. I mean, floral plates and colored glasses and napkin rings and
the interest in buying at auction is off the charts these days. Buying dinnerware and buying place setting, and mixing it all up. That's become a major part of our life.
Do you think that interest goes beyond our house?
Oh my God! When we shopped for our house, we did multiple auctions or builded multiple auctions.
It was during COVID.
During COVID,
I had nothing else to do,
and I wasn't there for the first round of installation at the house. I try to stay away because my nervous system can't take it. And I arrived after the trucks had left, and we're saying trucks.
Oh my gosh!
The house was filled with large China container boxes, and we had alleyways through the whole house.
But we do use it all
because he had bought so much. I mean, he was so bored during COVID. We had to find homes for all this, which we did. Every cabinet is full. It's incredible. But that has become a major force in the design world, is doing that. And clients love it. Clients love when we do that, especially when clients come to our house and we entertain and we show them how we're mixing all kinds of things together. And then they come the next time, it's something completely different. It's like, well, why can't I do this? It's you can.
But that is part of the job.
We are soup to nuts designers.
But you are showing your clients how to do some of this stuff. There's no better way to do it than to have them over to dinner where you've done it, then they can experience it for themselves and try and understand it. And, on more than one occasion, somebody said, oh, I have these things in the back I should pull forward. And I have this and I have that. And it just gets them thinking. And hopefully their life is more fun as a result. And
it's a good way to keep some of the past, Bill has things from his great grandparents. I have things from my grandparents. We mix in with modern things that were just developed, just made. So it's a good way to keep the old with the new without it looking too much like grandma's house.
But it could be water glasses. It could be candlesticks. I think the discussion has been talking more about China, but it's all the other bits, the vases, anything that you're putting
Silverware,
out. I mean,
linens.
Picture a summer garden party, collection of old vases, different plates and glasses. Flowers from the garden, and just talking about it sounds pretty, doesn't it?
And then back to the whole romance of summer houses, beach houses, coastal living, is that romance of the garden party, which whether we do that old fashioned, Sunday ice cream social, that kind of thing is always also in our heads, that while the garden is beautiful and the roses are all in bloom and the hydrangeas look fabulous, you want to put the tables out on the lawn and, dress them up like Bill does every year for Nantucket by Design, and have a gorgeous party. That's why we're there. That's why we love the place.
You mentioned essentially heirlooms, things that are passed down. I wanted to ask about the houses in particular, because I know, and this is not exclusive to the East Coast by any means, but being an East Coaster myself, I know that many houses all around the coast are often passed down. I would argue that a lot of beach houses often have a nostalgia because grandparents passed them down and then
Oh, for sure.
and
Yeah.
then
Yep.
so could we
With
talk
some of
about
the
that for a
stuff.
minute and how that plays into design when you're called in? I mean, I don't know if you're necessarily called into houses that's a situation that you've dealt with before, but is it something that you could feel comfortable speaking to, just like how you approach design when people want to give it a fresher look, but also there's this nostalgia. It's been in the
Well,
family.
one that didn't come from a family, but we had a client that wanted us to help her find a beach house. I mean, a real beach house. We went off searching. Nothing seemed right until we actually found one that was in an incredible setting. But the house itself had been so overly designed, so overly decorated, so heavy looking. The trim of the house was painted. This is Nantucket. The trim of the house was painted like almost Kelly green.
It was more Virginia. It was more like a Virginia
It was just
farmhouse.
so heavily decorated,
Beautifully
Okay.
done, just out of place.
that I could
Yeah.
not see the client in this house. And so we left with the broker and we went home, and Bill looked at me and said, you know what? You have to think about this the way you would tell a client to think about it, is that think about it after we've done it. You can't just look at the face value of this house and get freaked out by it, because
That's cosmetic. The green paint was
Yeah.
the thing.
And so,
The
and I said, you're
decorations
right. I
go
mean,
away.
why didn't I do that while I was there? Why did I have such an emotional reaction to it? So we went back the next day, we looked at it, and this house is now the quintessential beautiful beach house overlooking
With a
the
wraparound
ocean,
porch
with
and
a
Wow.
wraparound porch, and the
some
trim's all
wicker
white,
furniture
and
outside and
gorgeous views. I mean,
lots of roses and
and
hydrangeas.
it looks like a house that could have been passed down from generation to generation. And that was kind of the feeling, is that we wanted it to feel like that. We wanted it to feel like the house had been in the family for 100 years.
We did have a friend/client in Palm Beach who presented us with all of her family stuff. Yeah, and Gary's answer was throw it
And she
out.
kept saying, "No, I want your honest opinion. What do you think? I mean, what's your honest?" And I said, "Well, this could work, that could work. I mean, yeah, it's okay." And I'm thinking inside, like, "Oh my God, what would I do with all this?" And finally, she said, "No, I want you to tell me your honest truth." And I said, "You know what? Throw it all out. It's crap. Throw it all out tomorrow."
Oh my
She
gosh.
started to cry, and it's like, it's like, you asked me,
Oh my gosh. That's great.
It's awful. Unfortunately, we don't have very much of that. I think it's less likely these days, unless you're very lucky, to find a house that's been passed down through the generations. But I
Yeah.
think that is always the hope, is that it feels like that it doesn't feel like that's our goal, that it wasn't designed last week, that you want it to feel like it's been there for a while.
So when we shop for these houses, sort of to get to where he's talking about, because you can go in a house and you'll see that, oh, somebody decided they wanted a beach house. So all of a sudden it looks like a showroom versus
Yeah.
a home. We make sure we mix up the sources. We use a lot of vintage stuff, especially with lighting. We use a lot of vintage lighting, accessories. You can mix in new stuff with, antique boxes and things, sailors, Valentine's, whatever it might be that relates to the locale. But we spend a lot of time curating that kind of thing.
And we're very much into, which I know I've already said, but into reuse and into finding things that have been fabulous somewhere else, and they could be fabulous again. I'm not a shop the local lighting store and just buy everything from there. We do buy some things from shops like that, but I believe in finding something at auction, lighting wise. We've actually had things discarded from other projects that will, say, okay, that was awful there, but that could be great such and such house. We will mix that in. Is not just sourcing from one place. You walk into somebody's, oh, where that shop is. They're in London. Oh yeah, we love that shop, but they have 25 pieces from the same shop in the house. You have to just be careful.
It should look like it's been, unless somebody wants a totally brand new looking house, which is maybe not be the right person for us. Our goal is to make it look like you've lived in the house and collected things over the years. So everything isn't exactly a match. And there are things in the house from different periods of time. And
Is it like a ratio? Like, do you aim for a certain ratio, or is it just kind of a case by case basis of
It's
antique versus new?
It's a feel. It's just, it's just an innate.
Yeah.
sort of feeling.
Like typically the upholstery, by and large, for the most part, the upholstery will be new.
Though
Carpets can be a mix.
we do
Draperies will be new.
we do actually recover and find things that are old too, upholstery wise. And the other thing is I love Bilecki woven furniture in New York. They have the most beautiful wicker and rattan furniture. I buy a lot new. I also buy a lot of it at auction and sales that we find. And I tend to mix that, not only put it on a porch, but I mix it in the main house with upholstery.
You could have a pair of Bilecki woven chairs flanking the fireplace with a sofa that's newly upholstered.
So I like that combination of rattan or wicker against the upholstery,
and I think
which is not revolutionary. People have been doing that for forever, but I think I bring that forward and try to keep that as part of that sensibility.
But you can make that work in a contemporary house or a traditional house.
Totally.
You may be a little bit more spare in your use in a more contemporary house, but you could definitely make that work.
And Billy Baldwin, who designed chairs for Bilecki, actually in the 70s, used them in New York in his own apartment. So it's that mix of things that just, for me, just works.
This is my own curiosity because I'm a culture person. I love learning about new cultures, because there are small cultures within all these places, right?
Oh yeah,
cultures.
totally.
Are there things that you have discovered, whether it be East Coast, and even again, that's such like a broad term, but if we're talking New England versus Mid-Atlantic versus Southern Coastal versus tropical, are there any regional quirks or cultural elements that you've had to integrate into the design?
You're joking. Are there quirks?
There's always quirks.
There's always quirks.
Yeah. One major quirk is in Antigua. There's, there are incredible artisans there, but you have to know, unfortunately, my assistant Lee Harrington grew up in Antigua, so she knew the resources. And we had some at the Mill Reef Club. Happy Ward was the architect, and we had a lot of his furniture there. We needed additional chairs, so there was a craftsman who we hired to copy the chairs. He wasn't only copying the chairs, but he actually carved the chairs on the site. So he was like, sitting on the floor in the house, carving and cutting and making these chairs. So it's things like that you don't expect to find along the way, but that is very important. In Palm Beach, we have a resource that does wicker and rattan, and they also restore it, they renovate it, they'll reupholster it in the original way. And they know all the people to help them along the way. So it's all these people are really important. Nantucket, as we already discussed, it's the weavers, the looms, basket makers, people that make mirrors for us, with baskets around them. Everywhere you seem to find that kind of hidden gem that makes the house speak the native language.
It makes it more special too.
Makes it way more special.
But it's worth a minute to educate the homeowner. We had a job in Palm Beach one time where we had done all these things, and the husband was initially just looking at the bill. And it's like, no, let's talk about why we did these things and where we source these and why. And after we had the conversation, he was totally comfortable because he understood that everything in the house was special and that, it was money, whatever he spent for money, it was well spent.
Mm-hmm.
And we also, clients will start to question, price and things of that sort. And, it's the whole interest in feeling like you're not spending crazy money. And when you explain that, you may be spending a lot of money, but you are using local artists, local painters, local craftsmen.
Supporting the community.
You are supporting the community. This is really important.
Not Amazon.
It's not just Amazon. This is really important that those people that you love, whose work you love, that you are helping them, because without the clients to do that, a lot of these artists are completely lost.
And then the community would lose its flavor. The whole reason you moved there would go away.
Yeah.
This is kind of off topic, but going off of all these kind of place-based spots, you mentioned color early on. Depending on where you are, do you have colors that you, and I know you mentioned really pulling from the outdoors to inspire a lot of those palettes. Do you find one that's something more coastal properties pull off versus a property in the suburbs?
You can always find blue in a coastal
Yeah, I
property,
mean,
some shade of blue,
obviously,
Yeah.
blue is the color, and it's probably a mid blue.
a little bit of gray in it, maybe.
Yeah, with in one house it may have a little more gray, in the other house maybe it's a little more periwinkle. But I would say that that mid range blue is probably the most. So I think also, surprisingly enough, maybe like pink, maybe more of a sunset pink in Nantucket. Maybe it's more of a soft petal pink in Santa Barbara.
Like a dune grass green.
Yeah, dune grass green is big and it works really well. And again, out in California, we probably have a little more olive in it. I would say those are the touch tones. Maybe less so yellow.
Not that we haven't done a yellow room here,
Yeah,
yeah, but not a
I would say
not a go-to
and
color.
generally not red. Unless it's an accent in a Nantucket, it would be Nantucket red, that faded kind of pinky red color.
Although I guess it was a historical, maybe you might see some
Yeah, but I wouldn't say it would be
but not coastal.
overwhelmingly red. I think it
Yeah.
would be more of an accent for me, at least. Our own house, we're very red, white, and blue in our current house in Nantucket. But the red is a toned down, again, kind of red, more towards Nantucket red.
And it's more just an accent color.
Not necessarily coastal specific, but just in general. Do you have any antiques that you think you turn to time and again to incorporate into folks' homes?
Definitely tables, I would say. End tables, sometimes dining tables. I tend not to do matching color. I wouldn't do a brown wood dining table and brown wood dining chairs. Like our house in Nantucket, we have a whitewash dining table with brown English chairs.
We typically always throw some sort of antique chest in the house.
And we also have an Italian secretary at our house in Nantucket. Which is wood and inlay. It has stars on it, big compass stars, so it has a relationship to the island. But it depends on the house. I would say it's either the dining chairs, maybe that's it. Maybe is some end tables,
a chest, a mirror,
a chest,
and we may not use them all in the same house. It really depends on the aesthetic of the homeowner. I mean, if it's a homeowner who does want to go a little more clean and contemporary, you use those pieces a little more sparingly, but in an effective way. With somebody who's a little more traditional, you may have more of that stuff.
We have a design friend who years ago said something like, you should always have something old in every room. And she said, it better not be you, so it's, so you should have one antique in a room, which I kind of, in a way, go by. I don't want to be overwhelmingly, even in a historic island like Nantucket, I don't want to walk in and find everything antique. That to me is kind of, I might as well be in a shop.
Yeah, for example, in Nantucket, we have a new dining table that's whitewashed, but we have these 18th century dining chairs around it. And then there's a Parsons style sideboard with it. And it's on a brown floor with a woven rug. So when you put that all together, it's a very pleasant read.
And we have a French Maison Janssen coffee table. That's brass and glass and black. It's that mix that's, to me, it's important.
Do you have any dream locations that you haven't worked in yet?
We're about to start one. We just got a new job in Saint-Tropez.
Oh, that's so exciting.
So we're very excited about that. We did another boat project. It was an icebreaker boat so that we could have an understanding of the boat. The client invited us on a trip with them. And we actually went to Antarctica.
What?
I mean, exactly.
Really?
So we do have all kinds of adventures.
Wow.
And they're usually somewhere around water.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool.
We almost do nothing that's not near water.
Montana.
But there was a river.
No.
It was a river.
It was a river.
There was a stream.
No, we are basically
primarily
coastal.
We're water driven.
Yeah.
Even Boston's coastal, really.
New York,
coastal. We're an island. So there you go.
Okay. Well, very cool. Before we close out, Bill, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about this year's Nantucket by Design? Because it is creeping up, which is exciting.
Okay, so this year's Nantucket by Design will take place July 14th to 17th. Our theme this year is interwoven, which relates to the new exhibit at the Nantucket Historical Association called Behind the Seams, which examines historic fashion and textiles. I was at the opening last week. It's a great exhibit going back to sort of 18th century stuff where you had sheep on the island, so you had wool. For a brief period of time, they grew mulberry trees. They experimented to try to have silk produced. A really fascinating exhibit. But again, our topic is called interwoven, so it ties in with that. We're not strictly textile driven, though. We used interwoven in a little more creative way, in that we're trying to talk about it could be people that are part of interwoven with the fabric of the community. It's the interweaving of the disciplines, architecture, landscape architecture, interiors, etc. I think people will find it to be an exciting program. The first program is really Nantucket focused. There's a Boston-based designer and a friend of ours. Her name is Kristen Patton. She bought a house from the Nantucket Historic Association that was an old sea captain's house, and it's a recent renovation. She won the Bullfinch Award from the ICAA. They'll be exploring that house, and it gets into recycle, reuse. I think the audience will find it fascinating. So I'm thrilled to announce that our keynote this year is going to be Martha Stewart in conversation with landscape architect Fernando Wong. We couldn't be more excited to welcome Martha to the island. It's going to be an exciting keynote speech, and hopefully she'll spend a couple of days on the island, and we'll get to know her. She'll get to know us a little bit. So we're very excited about that. Our luncheon this year, we have Patrick Frey coming in from Pierre Frey to be interviewed by Stacy Bucas from Quintessence. It should be another great discussion. So lots of great speakers, lots of interesting topics. We very much look forward to seeing everybody there. And again, thank everyone for supporting the Nantucket Historic Association.
I'll make sure to share links, not only for people to find Nantucket by Design information for this year, but also to find you both. So I'll put social media links, I'll put website links all in the show notes, make it an easy one-stop shop for everybody. Thank you both for taking the time to chat today. I'm more excited for the weather to warm than ever, and I enjoy our East Coast summer.